Good day, panel. We are the 2023 Human Agency Group. To introduce our Human Agency project, we can start off with our research question. What does the designer need to consider to assist user-provider value co-creation for mainstreaming a circular economy within the context of Sunnyside? We have broken our project down into its introduction, looking at key points of theory and the context we find ourselves in, our mapping in terms of waste, our identified food and fashion typologies, and then our chosen nodes of intervention for our smaller group value proposition. And then finally, our key takeaways of our group analysis in order to guide our value propositions. So firstly, what is human agency? Human agency is defined as an individual's capacity to determine and make meaning from the environment through purposive consciousness and reflective creative action. We are approaching this project with an interpretivist research methodology that is built upon the basis of a human-centered approach, looking specifically at the realm of food and fashion, whereby we observe, collect, and map data, employing a mixed method approach using observational tools such as Bradley's 9 dimensions, as well as Ziesel's observation of physical traces, both of which focus on qualitative inquiry. Both our approach and observational tools are then filtered through a circular economic and systems-based lens. Our main delimiting factor was that conversation and personal interviews were not permitted. Thus, we solely rely on observation and desktop studies. It is important to note that we observed the context of Sunnyside over a course of 11 days, varying our visits to morning, to midday and afternoon, and evenings. As we made observations, we noted them and then collated them during the times we were not on site. When focusing on our context, it became important to employ some observational tools, one of them being Bradley's 9 dimensions, whereby we focus specifically on object, actor and act, feeling, activity, space and time, goal, and event, through our general observations as well as our specifically identified food and fashion typologies. And the next observational tool being Ziesel's observational tools, focusing on byproducts of use, adaptations for use, displays of self, public messages, and the context itself. Today, in industries like fashion, food, and plastics packaging, products and systems are designed in such a way that most materials are destined for landfill, incineration, or leaked into natural environments. Thus, globally, a linear take-make-waste economic system is observed, whereby there are high input rates, intense production systems, and high consumption and waste outputs. The aim is thus to encourage a circular economy, which is a system solution framework that tackles global challenges, driven to eliminate waste right from the start and to circulate products and materials at their highest value, thus regenerating systems both on a products and service level as well as in nature, making use of byproducts of use, otherwise known as waste, by repairing and remanufacturing and reusing them. We arguably find ourselves within the context of Sunnyside in a necessity-driven circular economy, whereby actors adopt certain practices as a means of survival. Certain characteristics include having a circular mindset, targeted towards affordability and long-term functionality, as well as the forming of informal hubs, focusing on the circular economy, and time-intensive practices. There is also generally more of a tolerance towards imperfect solutions when dealing with processes such as production, consumption, recycling, and the use and reuse of waste and byproducts. We will also map our findings into practice types pertaining to the 10R system, consisting of reuse, repurpose, repair, and recycle. These practices will also be based on their value retention capacity, with higher value retention strategies like repurpose and repair belonging to shorter, higher priority loops of the circular economy versus recycling being a part of a longer loop with lowest value retention potential. We will then filter our identified typologies through practice descriptions, the actors, their reasons as to why they do these acts, and the general descriptive theme, relating back to the characteristics pertinent to a necessity-driven circular economy. With all of these theoretical principles taken into account, the aim of the project is to come up with value propositions which look specifically at the expansion from product to service to system design, filtered through economic, interactive, social, and environmental lenses. The goal is to move from ownership to partnerships, user to supply chain to society considerations, profit gains to solutions to societal problems through the proposition, and finally provide some insight into the narrowing of resource loops, which is using fewer resources per product, slowing resource loops, which is extending a product's life cycle, and closing resource loops, which is maintaining a circular flow of resources through the maintenance of these resources. To explore the role of a value proposition in a product service system, we will look at an existing example of a water refill service identified in Sunnyside. The product, 5-litre water bottles, are bought, used, and returned to the refill services. This system helps the environment by preventing plastic from entering the system, lowers the price of water for the consumer, creates a viable service for retailers, and finally provides social awareness to the community of the reuse of plastics. Thus, the interaction of the consumer and retailer through the product service system creates value on an economic, environmental, and social level. This example, though on a small scale, helps us understand the concept of and need for a clear value proposition through product service systems. Leading off from our theory, here we can see the larger context of Pretoria. On the northwestern side, we have Pretoria CBD, which is one of the oldest parts of the city. To the south of the city centre, we have Slavokop, which is an impoverished mixed-use residential area, and to the far north of our site is Arcadia, which is another old city suburb. Zooming in a bit closer, we can see our site of Sunnyside, characterized by dense suburban areas and a strong retail spine, linking areas of high consumerism, such as Sunny Park Mall, to more community, faith-driven areas, like the Hope Baptist Church at the end of Robert Sobukwe Street.
So welcome to Sunnyside. To be able to fully understand the area, one first has to look at Sunnyside's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So let's enter into the urban context and have a closer look at what these aspects look like. There is a limited amount of waste bins compared to the waste produced. An opportunity arises for better designed spaces that allow for multicultural exchange. The majority international residents might make locals feel displaced. A lack of infrastructure affects the local informal vendors and their products. The area is viewed as a transient space, resulting in a low number of long-term residents. The local use of infrastructure differs from its designed intention. Thus, interventions can be designed to support local demand. Waste pickers gain economic freedom through refuse. A strong symbiotic relationship exists between formal and informal. Waste can be used in a circular way to benefit locals. high number of residential apartments exist within the area. Religious and cultural friction occasionally arises between residents. Worldly activities like alcohol abuse prohibits restoration. Refuse pickers are sensitive to new formalized interventions. There is a strong sense of community from religious gatherings. A feeling of restoration and comfort is created through religion.
After our initial site visit, our original understanding of the Oxford definition of formal and informal, specifically to methods of trading, became blurred. According to the Oxford Dictionary, formal is understood as the official way of doing things, a designated space in between four walls, whereas the informal is more relaxed, a less precedented way of trading. Therefore, due to the nature of our investigation and our socio-spatial ethnographic approach, we had to redefine what is formal and informal in context to Sunnyside. We deduced that the informal is a representation of the fluidity in the response to how and why individuals and groups use space, whereas the formal is more determinant in its how and why. During our first site visit, there were four main observations that stood out. The first is that Robert Sobukwe Street was filled with mixed-use buildings that consisted of two parts. The first being a commercial space allocated at the ground floor, and the second a residential space that occupied the rest of the building. Sunnyside Galleries being one of these mixed-use buildings, fenced off their courtyard, allowing for slower movements through their premises. This made people feel safe and allowing them to find refuge from the busy pedestrianised street of Robert Sobukwe. The second observation was that of the structures the city implemented for the street traders. These structures, though not designed or placed according to the way traders use space or trade, gave the traders a sense of place and identity, allowing them to make the space their own, even just for the day. The third observation is the street corners that are populated with street vendors. This allowed them to present their items to more foot traffic. The final observation was the constant resilience we witnessed from street traders to local shop owners. The street traders creating their own system of upcycling, which allows them to display or transport their goods and services. This was seen through the reuse of broken trolleys to devise a transportation device for their goods and using crates and boxes as support structures for their goods to be presented on. Sunnyside throughout the years. For us to understand the current relationships and state of Sunnyside, we did a deep dive into its brief history. Sunnyside went through a rapid expansion and growth in the 1960s, which led to the development of Sunnyside Galleries and later on Sunny Park Mall in 1974. Fast forward a couple of years and we land in 2020, the year of the COVID-19 pandemic. This pandemic facilitated the increase in the informal sector in Sunnyside. After the pandemic, the shops and businesses along Robert Sobukwe Street became more owner-orientated, decreasing the amount of franchise stores along the street, and thus enhancing the cultural identity of Sunnyside. We observed several street vendors were located in front of local stores on Robert Sobukwe Street. Our initial thought was that the owners of the stores and the street vendors had a mutual agreement. To our surprise, the relationship between street vendors and store owners actually formed part of the bylaws for informal trade within South Africa. There are several bylaws which constitute the rights of informal traders as long as they abide by the law. Some of these bylaws are legislated in the Business Act No. 71 of 1991 and are located in the Constitution of South Africa. From our investigation into the bylaws and legislation around informal trade in South Africa, we deduced some positives and negatives surrounding this legislation. The positives of this legislation is that it is designed to provide opportunities for the unemployed and refugees. The legislative relationships between informal traders and formal traders is then integrated in the development plan for the city. This legislation changes the perception of the public on how informal traders trade and that it is indeed a legalized activity. This legislation minimizes the negative impact of informal traders on the environment through its rules and regulations holding traders responsible for their personal waste and cleanliness of the area they occupy. The legislation demarcates space for informal trade, therefore regulating the trade. The negatives of this legislation is that the legislation does not include infrastructure for informal traders in their designated trading areas or support services and facilities like pollutions, provision of water and electricity. There are excessive government regulations that prohibit and limits informal trade, one of them being the disproportionate registration fees to register as an informal trader. Based on our two topics we focused on, food and fashion, we gathered quantitative data which informs us as to how much waste South Africa as a whole generates in respect to food and fashion. This quantitative data allows us to understand how much waste is being produced in order for us to devise an intervention which incorporates the notion of circular economy and product-service-systems to combat the levels of waste being produced. Through several more site visits, we observed common byproducts in the food and fashion industries. In Sunnyside, the fashion byproducts which are available is PET and HDPE plastics, textile offcuts, natural and synthetic hair. The byproducts of food which are available is LDPE plastic, biodegradable waste from vendors and restaurants, and broken bottles and other packaging materials. For us to understand how waste is managed within Robert Sobukwe Street, we mapped out what facilities are available for the disposal of waste. With our findings, we observed that there are two formal facilities of waste disposal, that being the green bins, which were located at commercial and apartment blocks, and green mesh bins, which was located on the sidewalk throughout the street. From our observations, we saw waste being disposed of at the riverbed, mainly by the trolley pushers who disposed of unwanted materials that were not recyclable. The waste collected is deposited in green waste bins, which are commonly found in small streets and are used by larger municipal waste management systems. This waste is transported to the Mooiplaas landfill site, whose direction is represented with large arrows, and is located in the Centurion area of Pretoria. After mapping the disposal facilities of waste along Robert Sobukwe Street, we wanted to further understand how waste is managed in Sunnyside and what systems are currently in play. The trolley pushers collect recyclable materials out the green bins and the mesh bins. Once the trolley pushers are at full capacity, a private company collects the accumulated recyclable materials at a designated drop-off point, and the trolley pushers are compensated for the amount of material they collect. The individual litter pickers collect waste which lies around the streets of Sunnyside. These litter pickers are employed by private entities like the church and dispose of their waste within the designated disposal facilities. The municipal trucks collect waste out of the green bins and mesh bins every Tuesday. The excess waste in the green bins that is not collected by the municipal trucks is then collected by a private company like ABATCH. These companies are employed by the owners of the commercial companies and apartment blocks of Sunnyside. Once we understood the waste collection system in play, we identified that there are two internal systems within the main waste collection system. The two internal systems are that of informal, being the trolley pushers and litter pickers, and the formal, the private companies and the municipality.
Throughout the project, our main focus was on understanding the relationship between the formal and informal realms within the food and fashion industries in Sunnyside. This is keeping in mind our contextual definition of formality being either defined or fluid in why and how users inhabit space. We analysed each typology through the framework of Spradley's 9-dimension tools and Cecil's to unpack each typology. Some of the observation prompts were time, activity, actors, space, displays of self, and goal. These 7 typologies focus on the food industry, the most fluid and therefore informal being the Brewmaster, and the most defined and formal being the commercial franchises such as McDonald's and Uncle Fauzi's. Early afternoons, the Brewmaster can be found on intersection corners selling freshly brewed corn and meat kebabs. The main byproduct of use is corn husks and shells, as well as charcoal bags and ash. They are fulfilling a need for a quick fix meal for pedestrians heading home from work, and affordability is key for their success of the business. Early mornings bring a host of on-the-go vendors that move through Robert's Bookwear with buckets of freshly baked scones and fed cook. Baked goods are made off-site, and customers take goods directly from the bucket, so not much waste is generated on-site. They are the most mobile typology, feeding into the transient feeling of Robert's Bookwear. They provide a solution to fast, affordable goods, but this means the quality of their products and presence on-site may vary. Fresh produce vendors line the streets, selling a variety of local and traditional African veggies, using city structures and reused crates as display for goods. There's a main supplier who sells to all the vendors, which explains their produce being similar. Their relationship with local food stores is legislated, as previously mentioned, which creates a sense of community and belonging. We found most liquor stores are locally owned. Due to the products, namely alcohol and tobacco, the stores and sidewalks act as an event space throughout the day. The byproducts become more technical, namely glass bottles and cans accumulating at street corners. Stores tend to be situated just off Robert's Bookwear, directing some movement to the adjoining streets. Signage of local food stores has a strong focus on their product, such as soap, cool drinks, and flour, rather than business branding. The local shops provide vegetables similar to the vendors, however, they are packaged, creating more waste, but are also slightly more expensive. We found that often tobacco products are sold in these stores, linking the ritual around eating and smoking. Open storefronts allow interim gathering spaces for customers that move through the site. The bars and restaurants bring nightlife to Robert's Bookwear, attracting people from the surrounding areas. People linger longer in these settings, which makes it an outlier for our overall idea of Robert's Bookwear as a transient space. Bottles, cans, and cooking oil are more technical and chemical waste produced here. Majority of the activity takes place in late afternoons to evenings, as it is a cultural hub of energetic and engaging social interactions, where the community is the heart of the activity. McDonald's, Uncle Fauzi's, and Romans are some of the franchise enterprises on the street. These businesses are profit-driven rather than a day-to-day living like a lot of the local community-run stores. Their presence on Robert's Bookwear feels somewhat alien, as they are often fenced off and visually stick to a more brand identity rather than trying to fit into the community's identity. Although these spaces act as landmarks for some of the informal typologies who utilize the more formal infrastructure.
These 7 typologies focus on the fashion industry, the most fluid and informal being the street barber, with the most determinate and formal being the fashion enterprises. Typically found on street edges, away from traffic, closer to more foot traffic, we find the informal barbers. Adding to the community's sense of self, they cut and braid hair, mostly over the weekends. Informal traders such as street cobblers often operate on smaller side roads just off Robert's Bookwear. Walls or fences are used as a display for their work. Basic tools and material offcuts are used to make their shoes, producing little waste as everything can be reused, linking to the idea of circular economy through necessity. The mixed accessory vendors mainly use the floor with rugs and blankets, self-made tables and city structures to display their products. They contribute to self-expression in the fashion realm, focusing on smaller accessories like socks, hats, glasses, and many more. Upcycling old shoes and clothes. Local thrift vendors take over the street on the weekend. Using fences and rugs, they display their products, which are each unique as they have pieced together collected items to increase each piece's value. Little waste is produced as everything can be reused, and if not, it is given to those less fortunate. 2 types of typologies coexist in a shared rented space. which include hairdressers and nail technicians. Busiest on Fridays and the weekend, they aim to provide quality hair and nail services to the community. Synthetic hair and empty product containers are their main form of waste. There is a codependency between self-sustained tailors with immaterial shops. An agreement is made between material stores to buy ready-made garments from the tailors, using materials they provide. These stores are most busy over the weekends and after lunch hours. The clothing store welcomes the user with their fashion already displayed in windows or on shelves. Users are encouraged to browse, but the stores are rarely busy during the week, although they experience more foot traffic during lunchtime and at the end of the day, but mostly on weekends. As a broad overview of the food typologies, we see the informal typologies tend to gather just off Robert Sobukwe, and formal spaces are subdivided to lessen rent. The fashion industry contributes greatly to the community's sense of identity, in selling local fabrics and making people feel good about what they're wearing and how they look. Identified outliers are the street barber, who often work early mornings. When looking at the northern elevation of Robert Sobukwe from the mall to the church, we see that the stores closest to Sunny Park are predominantly formal food. Only after Troy Street, along Sunnyside galleries, do the formal fashion take precedence. Most formal stores in this top section host informal vendors at the front of their stores, but it's after Sillier Street where the informal vendors thrive. In this case, the informal food supports the event-like spaces propagated by the formal fashion. It is also interesting to note that informality rules on almost every street corner, from braaimaster to shoe cobbler and fresh food vendors. On the south side of the street, the wider pedestrian way accommodates an influx of bars and restaurants that spill out onto the street. What's interesting is although the road is wide, the informal vendors are less prevalent due to less foot traffic, but they still focus their attention on the street corners. In trying to understand the intricate network of relationships within not just food and fashion, but also the formal and informal realms, we placed each typology on a spectrum. By doing so, we can show that the informal is a representation of fluidity in their response to how and why individuals and groups use space, whereas the formal is more determinant in their how and why. Noteworthy points are the street barber and braaimaster being the most fluid, with commercial enterprises being the most determinate. In trying to contextualize our typologies within the urban setting, we looked at 3 nodes within Sunnyside where there was an overlap between the formal and informal typologies. The chosen nodes are Sunny Park Mall, Sunnyside Galleries, and the Hope Baptist Church. From our observations on site, these intersections were highlighted to have the most potential for future interventions. These nodes essentially become landmarks that would anchor our proposal in the context of Sunnyside. Sunny Park Mall has the highest concentration of enterprised food and fashion, and thus becomes the most formal node. It acts as an arrival point that draws residents from surrounding neighborhoods out into Robert Sobukwe. Sunnyside Galleries is a centralized node with an abundance of local entrepreneurs and highly skilled typologies. The space is fluid as it accommodates established vendors that form a transition into the community node. Its potential lies in its ability to draw people in and become a congregation space. The intersection at the Hope Baptist Church is the most community-focused node. This is characterized by the community's placemaking through daily rituals performed in the spaces around the church. Its strength lies in its already established public infrastructure, as well as the church's sense of belonging and community engagement.
To conclude from our analysis, we are able to find key codes and themes to guide our smaller group value propositions. Our context area consists of an entrepreneurial spirit that can guide further economic growth. There is an already existing overlap between the formal and informal interactive realms that has happened organically. Thus, there is an opportunity to strengthen these existing relationships or to create new ones. Areas of the environment are also deteriorated or unactivated. Thus, there is an opportunity to intervene in order to slow, narrow, and close resource loops. There is also an existing community social network whereby actors interact with each other on a user-to-user basis. So there is an opportunity to intervene in a way that could place more emphasis on societal changes through these connections.